Are you a scaling SaaS founder?
Ready to make the leap from leading a team to leading an organization? Join us each week as we refill your think tank with actionable tips and strategies from great business minds you know and those who don't know yet. This is SaaS Fuel with your host, 5-time entrepreneur, SaaS founder, and globetrotting adventurer, Jeff Maines.
Welcome back to the SaaS Fuel podcast, where being unconventional is the new black. You know, who needs a rule book when you've got a treasure map, right? I'm your host, Jeff Maines. I help B2B SaaS founders like you scale from 7 figures, which is good, to 8 and 9 figures, which is outstanding. Together, we supercharge revenue growth, create premium valuation, and craft a business you're proud of and a life of impact and freedom that you love. Well, yesterday was Labor Day. And so the whole weekend, I hope you got away from screens, out of the office, out of work, and got to just decompress and get a little R&R, maybe a little barbecue, spend time with friends and family. Finally got on the water this weekend and did some fishing. It's cool enough and got some free time away from screens as well. So Labor Day wrapped up yesterday, and then today we're right back into it. And this is SaaStr Week. Can you believe that, here in the Bay Area? Lots and lots of great things going on. If you're here at SaaStr, drop me a note because I'd love to connect with you. Remember Legos? Yeah, I'm betting that you do. Or if you have kids, I'm sure that you do. They're everywhere. It's kind of a universal thing. It's one of those things that's been around a long time. It's such a simple business, and it's incredibly timeless. You know, I think Legos will outlive us all. Growing up, I didn't have Legos. I had the knockoff building blocks that didn't fit Legos, and they only fit themselves and nothing else. And the block shapes were kind of limited. They didn't make sets like they do with Legos, like, movie themed sets or Star Wars sets. I wanted all that stuff, but didn't have them. But I had the knockoffs simply because they were cheap. There were no instruction manuals. There were no pictures on the box. You just had to create something and just make it up as you go. And I remember I was at a friend's house who actually had real Legos and lots of them. He had like every toy known to man. And so, that was a fun place to go hang out. And there are 4 of us over there, and we were, playing with his Legos, and we were building towers. And so the tallest tower wins. And the one kid whose house it was, he got all the big pieces and was really going for it. And, the other 2 were kind of existing on scraps and trying to build their towers. And I was the one that just built the weird Lego tower. And everybody else was making square buildings, and mine looked something like, I don't know, something between like a cross between a spaceship and a dinosaur and, something, who knows. And you know what? That's where magic happens sometimes. And it's not the tallest, but it was certainly the most interesting. It was the weirdest thing. We're supposed to be building tall towers, and I've got this weird thing, and they're like, what's that? You're not going to win. And it didn't take too long, and the other 2 kids kind of abandoned their race to the tallest and started getting creative and building things that were, not square, tall towers. In business, it's tempting to follow the tried and true blueprints. I teach those, and I'm not knocking that approach at all. I think sometimes you have to learn the rules in order to know how to break the rules. Other times, not knowing the rules at all actually can be your secret sauce. And that's how I succeeded across industries. I mean, nobody told me I couldn't, so I did. Think about Netflix. I got 2 guys commuting together for months, sold a company, and they've got office space. They're commuting back and forth, long commute, beginning of the day, end of the day, working on ideas, testing hundreds of ideas, floating all sorts of things out there. It's not something they came up with and said, hey, we're going to build this business next. Tested hundreds of ideas, a lot of good ideas, a lot of bad ideas, a lot of ideas that couldn't be executed well. And one day I had this idea and stopped and mailed a CD in an envelope to see if it would even survive. And boom, a star is born. Before long, red envelopes in the mail. And in hindsight, it's one of those things we look at and go, oh, wow, that was brilliant. But at the time, it was completely unconventional. I mean, who would do that? And it's a model that would never work. I mean, maybe it's even ridiculous. You can't do that. You can't mail a DVD. That's insane to think that you could do that. Besides, if you're trying to get into that business, one company owns the Goliath share of the market. You're going to get crushed. There's no way you can do this. And they didn't buy into that at all. And, we know that they ended up winning. I signed up for Netflix back in, fall of 97 or so and loved it. The model worked. They beat the behemoth. But even that was not a straight line at all. I mean, when you look at success, it's never always up and to the right. It's never a straight line, and it wasn't with Netflix either. But conventional wisdom would have kept them there. They won. I mean, this is success. They've beaten the giant in the market. They've got DVDs crisscrossing the country all the time. They got more distribution centers. They're really doing well. Conventional wisdom would have said, let's do more of that. But instead, they dived into streaming. And so was Netflix, were they experts in that space? Heck no. Are you kidding? I mean, streaming was new. A lot of people didn't even have internet connections fast enough to stream. But sometimes ignorance isn't just bliss, it's a breakthrough. Think about Dyson. Sir James Dyson. He had zero experience in making vacuums. I mean, the guy was an artist. He's an engineer, and he hated dust. That was the enemy, dust. 5,127 prototypes. And 5,126 of those failed. And so after 5,126 failures, he had something that worked. And he turned the vacuum world upside down, or maybe I should say cyclonic. And I don't know if at the beginning, if he knew about all the challenges, all the failures that were up ahead, would he have started? I don't know. But I bet ignorance fueled his innovation. He did things that other people said couldn't be done, wouldn't be done, would never work. And he made that happen and built an amazing company doing that. And as SaaS leaders, you are on the frontier of what's possible. Cherish the unconventional and creatively absurd ideas that pop into your head at 2 a.m. Maybe you don't know they won't work, and that's precisely why they might. So, ready to ditch the rule book, wear socks without sandals and still look cool? Well, I don't know. Don't necessarily do that. I don't know if there's a way that anybody can pull that off. But do join me in exploring how you can embrace your inner renegade and not just change the game, but create an entirely new game altogether. So it's time to let the world see your Lego tower, no matter how bizarre it looks. That's part of why we're all here, even here at SaaStr. Let's explore the art of not knowing what can't be done together. Because if you never know your limitations, you won't have any. You ready to scale your business with no conventional limits? Well, check out our sponsor today, Champion Leadership Group. It's the ultimate resource for SaaS founders and C-suite executives like you to continue to develop themselves, scale their companies, and never walk alone on the journey. Supercharge revenue by leveraging our SaaS Lego building blocks, time-tested growth principles, toolkits, playbooks, and frameworks designed to help you scale ARR from 7 to 8 to 9 figures. Collaborate and get unconventional with an elite network of SaaS visionaries. Confidently take that right next step to build a future-proof tower based on profitable growth, premium valuation, and freedom. You can learn more at championleadership.com. Our expert guest last week was Christine McDaniel, founder and principal of the Magnolia Firm. It's an M&A brokerage firm helping digital business owners like you, SaaS founders, achieve the perfect exit without compromising values or valuation. And our founder on Tuesday was David Rush, founder and CEO of Small World. Small World is reducing the cost of customer acquisition through the power of relationships. Small World Relationship Activation Platform helps sales and marketing teams secure warm introductions at scale. It's an amazing concept, fascinating founder journey, both of those. If you missed either of those episodes, go back and give them a listen. Hey, you've got a plane flight coming up, download them and listen to them on your way back home from SaaStr. My guest this week is Tony Flores, founder at Growth Science. He's formerly with Refine Labs and has been in B2B SaaS for the better part of the last decade, managing teams of go-to-market experts and spending millions on search and social campaigns. Over the last 2 years, Tony has come to believe that the industry standard approach to funnel analysis, insight gathering, and strategy development is fundamentally flawed and causing organizations to misunderstand what their target markets find relevant, useful, and compelling. Growth Science relies primarily on market research, not funnel analysis, to develop and guide B2B SaaS clients in their go-to-market execution. Growth Sciences helps challenger brands in a competitive B2B SaaS category to achieve meaningful differentiation from those competitors and incrementally grow their market share. Welcome, Tony Flores. Hey, Tony, welcome to SaaS Fuel.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So you've been working with B2B SaaS for quite a while. And how did you get into that and start working with SaaS companies?
Oh, well, early on in my college career, I went to USC, and I was living off campus in an area that was a little bit unsafe. So I wanted to make my way back toward campus, but I couldn't maintain a normal job while also maintaining the grades I needed for some of the grants and scholarships I had while I was there. So it was the first time I turned to the internet and typed to make money online, right? Trying to figure it out as a 20 or 21-year-old.
That's great.
The skills that I developed during that time period, working in parallel with going to school, things like running Facebook ads, Google ads, building marketing information systems, those types of things, back in 2014 and 2015, those translated nicely into the skill sets that SaaS companies, particularly B2B SaaS companies, were looking for their entry-level employees to have already developed outside of that job, right? So I was able to graduate and started putting out applications across the board, and SaaS and B2B SaaS just seemed to be the most interested in those skills that I had developed, and I kind of fell in love with it from there. So that's kind of what got me into it. And then ever since, I've worked in different industries, but it's always come back to B2B. It's always come back to SaaS, and that's really my sweet spot where I've landed over the last decade or so.
So tell me about growth science.
Okay. All right. I can do that. So growth science is, in its essence, growth science is an approach to go-to-market execution for B2B SaaS companies that relies primarily on market research and competitive understanding to prioritize go-to-market execution tactics, right? As opposed to more traditional sources of market insights like funnel analysis, internal subject matter expertise, advice from agency or vendor partners. And I have found that approach, right, where you start with the foundational understanding of the market's wants, needs, and desired outcomes and use that as the basis for your go-to-market tactics, results in a much higher likelihood of achieving go-to-market success than ideas that are derived internally based on data that we have within a CRM or based on experience from one or two people that are associated with the business. So growth science, like I said, works primarily with B2B SaaS companies, and our goal is to help those companies achieve better go-to-market outcomes through better positioning and competitive strategy.
So how did you come up with that? And just the contrast between the internal data versus external?
Well, so by this time in my career, I've worked with about 35 B2B SaaS companies, 30 to 35 B2B SaaS companies very closely, in various capacities, but all sort of marketing and sales and growth related. And it was just an observation of correlations between things that businesses were doing that resulted in go-to-market success and things that businesses were doing that didn't, right? So the businesses that I've worked with that have eventually achieved their desired go-to-market outcomes, they did things like they were very intentional about how they positioned themselves relative to competitors. They were intentional about designing programs that helped them achieve competitive advantage. They were focused on balancing their go-to-market execution in a way that created more runway and lifespan for those campaigns. Others that didn't do well, right, were sort of in this cycle of go-to-market, execute funnel analysis, come up with some insights, and come up with some game plans for what to do next. And just over time, I came to the realization that the way we typically go about implementing marketing information systems and deriving customer insights just appear to be so rife with bias and subjectivity that they're failing to help businesses relying on those processes differentiate in a meaningful way. And that was hampering go-to-market efforts in aggregate from my observation. So I set out to kind of solve that problem. And my first place that I turned was, okay, what are some of the existing market research frameworks that are already out there that have already been proven? Things like jobs theory, right? What Tony Flores and Strategy are up to, some of the ideas from Michael Porter, that famous professor out of Harvard, on competitive strategy, competitive advantage. And I started bringing these ideas to the market just sort of from my own perspective as an account manager or working in-house for a company. And what I realized was that the reason why a lot of these ideas aren't first and foremost in a business's decision-making process is because they're simply inaccessible. The business is characterized by fast moving competitors, competitive environments, a lot of innovation, lots of new entrances, low barriers to entry. Especially in B2B SaaS, a typical market research project might take 6 months, but in that amount of time, the entire competitive landscape has changed. So I came to this conclusion that we don't have an approach to competitive strategy and market research that is accessible given how competitive things are. But the alternative, which is basically marketing information systems, funnel analysis, and the subjective interpretation thereof, are leading businesses to a fundamental misunderstanding of their target market. So what I'm trying to do with growth science is I'm trying to create an approach to market research and competitive strategy that is faster and that also bridges the gap between those insights and the specific action plans necessary for a company to go execute and achieve competitive advantage. And I think by doing so, I'll make market research and those best practices associated with positioning, competitive advantage, those types of things that I really believe in. I think I'll make those ideas more accessible to B2B SaaS companies and other B2B companies that are in competitive, fast-paced environments.
Yeah. The market does change super, super fast.
Yeah.
And 6 months is an eternity, especially when we're talking about SaaS world. So how do companies iterate that fast? I mean, strategy is something that changes on an ongoing basis. And a new competitor pops up and you've got to adjust for that. How often should we be looking at our strategy? And is it a complete pivot? Is it a rebuild? Is it just some tweaking? What's your take?
So before I answer that, maybe I'll just start with like a definition of how I view strategy, right? Because strategy is a term that is thrown out all over the place, especially in like marketing and sales circles. You've got social strategy, you've got community strategy, website strategy, competitive strategy. When I think about strategy, I align with a version of Michael Porter's definition of strategy, which is more or less the plan that a company has to help them arrive at a target competitive position. Right. And my belief is that by understanding your competitive landscape and defining a target competitive position that you want to pursue and doing so in a competitively advantageous way, the things a business will do to arrive at that position, if it's well defined and well understood, are going to be the things that also move the needle regarding go-to-market outcomes, right? Those things that you prioritize, those action plans that you put into place, all those positioning ideas, functionally, you'll result in doing the things that move the needle for you versus the ideas that come out of, like I said, those more antiquated approaches to developing ideas that typically result in redundant tactics and bad positioning. So I think strategy is something that is an active process. I think it's meant to help a company position themselves properly within a competitive landscape. And with that being said, I recommend that businesses review their competitive landscape and review their target competitive position quarterly, if at least every 6 months, but more often than not quarterly, because as you said, new competitors can be coming in, shaking things up, maybe developing new categories, introducing new innovations. They themselves might be pursuing target competitive positions that we didn't have on our radar yet. So going back, talking to customers, reassessing what the competitors are doing. You can make micro adjustments to how you're pursuing it, but in general, if a company has a good understanding of their customers' wants, needs, and desired outcomes, and that information is structured in a way so that it can last the test of time, which is a big problem with customer research. Oftentimes it loses value very, very quickly. If that research can be designed in a way that lasts the test of time, then those iterative refreshes of the competitive strategy are just micro adjustments based on the new activity. So I think that, like I said, like every quarter, if not every 6 months, would be a good time to do that if the research is done properly, right, in a way that stabilizes market dynamics so it can be relied upon for long-term decision making.
So how do we do that? How do we put together research or do the research in a way that doesn't put our bias in there and we don't come back with the results that we went out there to go get?
So that's you got two different questions there, right? So you've got how do you minimize your bias and subjectivity in your decision-making process, right? And then how do you go out there and actually get the information you need to execute good market research and good positioning and competitive strategy? Right. For me, and just talking from the B2B SaaS context and B2B in general, I think a lot of it has to do with how we define our markets. So when I'm researching persona document or reviewing persona documents from clients or just hearing anecdotally how the team is thinking about their competitive landscape. What I've come to believe is that most research in B2B lacks the specificity necessary to support good competitive decisions. And things like, you've got a business in a specific category that's researching different, maybe job functions, for example, right? And you wind up with a lot of things like CMOs in B2B SaaS are interested in driving efficiency through tech and want to find ways to collaborate with partners that are non-competitive, different things like that. I was just looking at 2 or 3 persona docs from a client today, and it was all that kind of stuff.
It's so general, it's not even useful.
It's so general, it's not even useful. And I think that has to do with how we define our markets, right? So what a lot of people, when they go in and they start market research, is they say, okay, what is the industry that I'm competing in, and what are the different job roles? And I think that's the most common one I see. And I think whenever you research an industry and job roles, just that market definition of we sell to CMOs in tech, or we sell to chief marketing officers in aerospace, I think that is an insufficient market definition. And I think in an effort to find insights and deliver insights that apply to that broad swath of people, you wind up with something that's super general, and you wind up with something that's not usefully specific. When in reality, I'm a much bigger proponent of not researching individual job roles within industry, but researching the businesses themselves that are competing within that industry. Because if you do market research that's focused on the business's competitive landscape and not the individual roles within each business and what they're trying to achieve, then you have a much higher likelihood of finding similarities between those competitors versus each individual job role that can be so contradictory to one another in terms of how each of those roles measure success. So I think that's a starting point. And I think in B2B, a lot of people, we need to define our markets based on the business and what that business is trying to accomplish versus that business and the individual roles within that business, right? And you'll get a lot more similarity across your research set. Second, I think that we need to define our markets the way Tony Olwick and Strategian and the Jobs to Be Done research guys, they define their markets, and they define their markets on a group of people or businesses that are trying to accomplish something. And basically that's the group that you're targeting and the jobs to be done statement that you've defined for that market that you're trying to research. And I have found that creates similarities in what businesses are trying to accomplish that fit within that definition in such a way that it's reliable for long-term decision making, and that there is a lot more useful specificity that can be derived from those conversations. Trying to find similarities between the businesses competing in that space versus the different roles that are supporting those businesses in that space. So I think the starting point, to go back to your original question, I think the starting point is that we as businesses need to start getting better at defining the markets that we're researching before we move forward into market research efforts. And that's where that useful specificity will start to come, and people will begin to see it when they just make that adjustment.
That makes a lot of sense. Instead of just taking one of those just platitudes and plugging it in, like, this is our market because we need something to fill that definition.
Yeah, exactly. And I have an example of that. If I can give you a quick example.
Yes.
So I had a client that was in the aerospace fastening. So they made rivets that hold airplanes together, right? Talk about a commodity product, right? Like there's no difference between this rivet and this rivet, the same regulatory requirements, the same standards for strength, the same installation tooling, the same everything. But they were trying to figure out how to compete against the next guy selling the exact same thing. And so when I saw their persona documents, there was one persona that was the buyer at these companies, and their KPIs were like, get the raw material in for as cheap as possible. That was a KPI that was important to that persona within that industry. On the other hand, you had the operations team, which was all about maximizing the utility of raw material and making sure things don't break and making sure things don't have to get sent back to scrap, different things like that. And right there, those two KPIs for each of those roles within the same business are contradictory.
Yes.
Right? They're competing against one another, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But when you're trying to understand a group of people and find usefully specific similarities between them, if you've got a lot of those contradictory dynamics in how success is measured, it's going to be very hard to arrive at something other than interested in collaborating. right? But when you elevate to the business itself and what unites those roles together, what are the united business objectives that guide what each of those roles are doing, and you do that for a properly defined market based on what that group of businesses is trying to accomplish, back to the jobs theory stuff, then you've got the foundation for a stable market dynamic that you can research and build upon over time. Right. So that right there is just an example outside of B2B SaaS about why I think sometimes it's better to elevate your market understanding outside of the role. And remember that we're in B2B, businesses selling to businesses. So let's focus there a little bit. Yeah.
So what was the solution then? I mean, because the rivets are truly a commodity. Yeah. You get the exact same things. Yeah. How do you differentiate when the product is the same?
So the product may be the same. Right. And this is something that happens in B2B. And I'll bring it back to B2B SaaS as well. So that's an easy example because these rivets are the same. If I put them on the desk in front of me, you're not going to know the difference. Right. And you're ultimately going to begin competing on price and service level. In B2B SaaS, in very, very competitive categories in B2B SaaS, if you look at virtual event platforms, or you look at marketing automation software, you look at any of these big, robust categories that have been around for a while, even though there's differences between each of them, to the non-category connoisseur like yourself and myself, when we look at those differences, they're so minute and specific that we get lost in that, and they almost seem like homogenous products to us, right? Which introduces those category dynamics. So if you talk to a lot of salespeople in those spaces, they'll say we struggle to sell on anything other than price and service level, and we struggle to differentiate in a way that resonates with the market. Right. So I think that the starting point for businesses that find themselves in a commodity market dynamic like that, from a research place, we've defined our market the right way. The next thing that we need to do is we need to start understanding the various markets that are engaging with our tools, right? Rather than just focusing on our category and trying to be the best within our category, especially in a commodity market dynamic like that, we need to elevate our understanding of which markets are even engaging with our product category in the first place, which is probably one of several categories they're engaging with to accomplish their broader need, their broader job. Right. So in my opinion, I think there's a lot that B2B SaaS can do to adjust their features and their go-to-market to position themselves properly for a specific market. But I have found that those games can, and especially from a marketing and sales perspective, that game can often be won on the ancillary, supportive programs, content themes, things that are not product specific, but still demonstrate authority and expertise within these specific markets that are utilizing the product, right? I'll give you a perfect example. So going back to B2B SaaS again, I had a client that was in the virtual event platform space. And they were competing against the same lines of success that already defined the category. Better engagement, easy to log in, remote attendance experiences, right? Just all the stuff that everyone in that space,
they all do the same thing from our perspective.
Not from their perspective, but from our perspective, right? So my first thing was, okay, I got to talk to some of your most recent buyers, and I got to figure out what their catalyst for consideration was, what got them into this market in the first place, and then how does their need transcend this product category? Right. So I can start finding bits and pieces to bring back into our category and position specifically for an important market. And so one of those markets that I identified was nonprofits. So I spoke to the head of donor relations at a nonprofit who had recently just purchased a virtual event platform. And believe it or not, he did not get into the market for a virtual event platform because he was interested in creating engaging remote attendance experiences, right? He was interested in building deeper relationships with his network of donors that were both local and far away. And the way that he was measuring the success of a virtual event platform as a tool there were success metrics that far differentiated from what the standard success metrics of virtual event platforms were. Donor engagement, being able to highlight the activities that donations go to, gamification for donations, recognition of specific donors on the call. There were all these things that were very, very unique to the event attendee experience for somebody who's wanting to manage donors and engage with donors versus just a broad swath of remote attendees, right? So what we did was we understood that job a little bit better, and I was able to deliver my client not only feature recommendations, but program recommendations and content recommendations that would help position them as the go-to virtual event platform for this important underserved segment. So when I say it's important that businesses identify and pursue a target competitive position, that's functionally what I'm talking about, because we identified that important underserved market and we set a game plan for how to do well for them, right? And just that effort, right? And being supported by marketing and sales going to market and keeping that narrative going, we saw an increase in sales from that segment just because we did the right things for them. Right. And that's what I mean by what I'm saying. Positioning results in positive go-to-market outcomes. Proper positioning results in positive go-to-market outcomes. And that's just a little example of one that I did for a recent client in a very commoditized, competitive, redundant category. Right. And that's one thing that frustrates me so much. One thing that I see in my space, especially B2B SaaS so much, is, well, once businesses are there, you only win on brand. You only win on price. You only win on economies of scale. No, there's probably 100 or 150 different markets that are engaging with your product, and you probably know 4 of them. Right. And who knows how important those are and how big, and who knows how well they're being served by existing solutions. The only way to uncover that is to have very, very deep conversations with different members of your ideal customer profile and understand the thing that more broadly they're trying to accomplish by even exploring your category in the first place. And that's what we did for them, and they started to see some good results from it.
And I think that's really interesting because you're doing things that most companies won't do. They're going to stay at that surface level, and they're going to compete on the 4 categories that they know, and they think that that's the entire universe. Yeah. And so if you do go deep, there's 96 other categories where are much more blue ocean.
Could be. You. Yeah, exactly.
And so it just takes a little creativity and being willing to do what other companies are not willing to do.
Yeah. And like I said, it's hard. This stuff that I'm talking about is really, really hard because one, again, the 2 reasons are it's slow. Typical approaches to doing this are very, very slow. They're expensive. And they don't bridge the gap between strategic insights and the specific tactics that a business should engage in that can yield competitive advantage. That is the missing piece. And in my experience, that's why most B2B SaaS companies that I work with, at first they're like, yeah, I don't need to know more about my market. I need to go to market. And it's like, yeah, but the way you're going to market is category redundant and not well positioned and not supportive of anything. And then what's worse in that case is that people are like, all right, well, how do I make iterative progress? That's when you get into this mode of let's build a marketing information system. Let's find correlations between upper funnel and lower funnel. And then let's subjectively interpret these things to design our next go-to-market plans. And my opinion is that just injects so much bias and subjectivity into a strategic decision-making process when in reality, there's these very simple answers that you can go get from markets and validate through broader surveys and things like that. But on the very foundational level, you can go get the information you need with 5 to 10 goals to find an important underserved segment of the market and understand how you can serve them better, right? So it's just about making what has already existed a little bit more accessible and useful to my underserved segment, which is B2B SaaS.
Yeah, I think it's interesting not trying to differentiate on features because that's features and price are kind of the go-tos, and especially if you talk to development. Yeah. Oh, it's all about features, but
of course,
that
especially technical founders.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So this is what you just said is actually it's from it's the book Michael Porter wrote on competitive advantage, and I think this is in the foreword or at least in like the intro. But he basically says that his opinion or his observation has been the most robust competitive positions, meaning the ones that are the most valuable to customers, but the most difficult for competitors to replicate, typically come from lots and lots of different activities taking place at the company, all in support of that target competitive position. So when I hear like feature differentiation, right? One, teams can build features. If you have a feature, you better believe that all your competitors are going to wind up with that feature in some short amount of time, especially if they can determine through their own processes that it's resulting in positive market outcomes.
Sure.
Right? What I recommend is that once you understand that position that you want to get at, developing new features is one thing, but it also needs to be layered with so that's how the product can support, right, the target customer outcomes. What about your founders? Your founders need to be go out there and evangelizing, right, what that important underserved market is, what the nuances are of that market, how they're trying to bring the company forward. Marketing can be developing programs and advertising campaigns that educate and reinforce. Sales can have talk tracks and sales decks that reinforce that unique competitive positioning as well. So when I speak to a customer, they're like, yeah, we figured it out. We know what our target competitive position is, and we've got these 2 features in this ebook we're writing. It's like, okay, well, that's a waste. Right? It needs to be something that's ingrained to your ongoing activity. It's a journey. You need to pursue it. And that requires ongoing activity. So as you said, features can be part of that set of things that results in competitive advantage, but any one of those alone is not defensible. Everyone will replicate it if they think it's easy. And before you know it, the market's just that harder to compete with them because that innovation becomes a table stake in a year.
Right.
So it's about stacking programs thoughtfully relative to known and prioritized customer outcomes.
So how do you make that process faster? Because you're right. Historically, it is slow. It's drawn out. And by the time you get to an answer, it's 3 or 4 months outdated, maybe. So how do you speed up that cycle and iterate faster?
Yeah. So I have 3 steps to it, right? Really 3 steps, at least in getting to the understanding, right?
Okay.
Because once you have the understanding, you can say, okay, you've got these programs you should do in this amount of time, and these go-to-market tactics make sense, and these are the audience you should be going after. All that stuff becomes so much easier to ideate and prioritize once you understand your competitive landscape and you've identified a target competitive position. But that's the hard part, right, is figuring that out.
Right.
And in my experience, the way that I would typically do it is if I have a client that comes on board, right, and I say, I want to talk to some of your customers, first thing I do is I say, okay, Mr. Customer, and this is my favorite question, and I think everyone should start their market research calls with this question. What got you into the market for a tool like Client in the first place? Right? I call that their catalyst for consideration. And the thing that got them into the market gives you so much insight about what they're trying to accomplish more broadly than just implementing and buying your tool, that it lays the foundation for a really fruitful and successful research call outside of what features do you like? What can we be doing better? Starting with the catalyst for consideration and the context around that need is ultimately what results in an understanding of their need that transcends your product category. And again, I think understanding the need that transcends the product category is foundational to research that yields good differentiation tactics and strategies. Once I understand that market definition, I slip right into my jobs to be done hat, right? Because I'm a big fan of that. And I say, okay, we have this unique market definition. There's a core functional job to be done associated with this. The next step, based on the strategy, right, that process, is we need to develop a job map, right? We need to understand how somebody goes about executing this core functional need that involves our product category. And the way they have it developed at Strategen is there's a job map typically has 8 steps to it roughly. Defining the objectives, locating the resources necessary to execute, preparing those resources for execution, confirming that those resources have been prepared correctly, executing the job, analyzing the results, making modifications, and then concluding the job. And that is a broad generality of how most people go about executing whatever they're trying to execute or accomplishing whatever job they're trying to accomplish. Within each of those steps, there are specific units of measurement that a customer looks to measure the efficacy of solutions, right? That were meant to address that job step. Things like minimize the time it takes to upload the document, maximize my leadership team's understanding of the process. And these are all in the form of minimize, maximize statements. They're directional units of measurement that help us support the customer outcome. And what I have found is that if we can get on a call with somebody, understand their catalyst for consideration, understand the broader need that involves our product category, define how they think about accomplishing that job, and then understand how they're measuring the efficacy of tools and solutions designed to support those things, you wind up with this long prioritized list of specific things that the business should be doing to support target customer outcomes. And by innovating and doing things that support those target customer outcomes, you will be doing the things necessary to pursue the target competitive position we've already identified, right? And then we're likely to be doing the things that move the needle in the market versus going through a process of funnel analysis and subjective interpretation that doesn't nearly align with actual customer success metrics the way this process does. And then once you have that, it's like, okay, what programs are we going to do? Who are the category competitors we need to position against? How are we going to position against them? All those other things become so much easier to do if you start with this proper market definition, this proper defining of the job and the success metrics already being used by the market that you just don't know yet.
Yeah. And how often does that change? Is that something that's more stable? And then what you're doing is you're changing that third step every quarter, twice a year?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a core tenet of jobs theory, is that customers are not loyal to products or brands. They're loyal to the job. They're loyal to the product, the service that can help them accomplish the job based on those success metrics better than the next person. And when disruptive innovation comes into play, it might take time to get a little bit of an uptake, but ultimately, based on their theory and their worldview, and mine as well, especially in B2B SaaS, over time, even the best brand with the most vocal leadership and all the signs of go-to-market success like engagement on LinkedIn, whatever it might be, ultimately games are won by the business that understands the job and can help that group of people accomplish the job better than the next guy.
When you bring this to market and start talking with clients about this, it's definitely a shift in where they've been. How receptive are they to really making that change and really viewing the world differently?
It depends on the context.
Sure.
Right. So I'll start with, it's such an easy answer, right? It depends on the context, but it does depend on the context a little bit, right? Because so I find that I have the most fruitful conversations with either second time founders or founders that have previously worked with a marketing agency or hired an in-house first time hire, right? There is so much information out there online about marketing information systems, revenue attribution, go-to-market tactics, all of these things that put us into this cycle of subjective interpretation and decision-making that there's a low likelihood that successful go-to-market outcomes are going to be achieved, but it's the foundational knowledge set of most people that are in B2B SaaS, right? So sometimes it's like, okay, hey, there's a better way to do this, and I get that resistance, but I will say, whenever I go and I conduct a little bit of preliminary category research and I can put their homepage headline, sub-headline, and nav bar on a slide deck that's right next to their 20 competitors. And I'm like, and I asked their head of sales, I go, which one are you?
Which one is yours?
Which one is yours?
I love that.
And then they go, okay, all right, I get it, right? And then I'm able to say, okay, so what happens if we go to market right now, right? You have an expensive product. You have to assume your buying landscape is well informed and they know all your competitors and they're taking time to think about it and they have committee approvals and all that kind of stuff. So we have a well informed marketplace, right? How are you going to look next to these guys? And the answer is completely the same. Right. And so that's when you start seeing commodity market dynamics. You start competing more on price and service level. And what I'm arguing is that, is there a set of important underserved market needs within this category that we can identify and work toward that will position us as uniquely different than the competitors and also better along the same units of success that already define the category? And that's sort of the end goal of this entire process, to do it quickly and efficiently, but to get to that point where we can say, hey, we're different and that difference makes us better because, right? And then everything we do from a founder perspective, marketing perspective, product perspective is meant to reinforce that, demonstrate it, and support it. That's it. Right. And again, doing that is what physically moves a business to the target competitive position. And those activities are the things that have a higher likelihood of resulting in positive market outcomes. Then again, those come out of the subjective interpretation of funnel analysis or what the founder did at the last company or something like that.
Right.
No.
So do you find that the companies, when they're looking at going after the underserved markets, that there's a concern of, if we do that, we're going to go too small? And we're going to give up on other business as well?
Yes, there is that concern. There is absolutely that concern. So the way I talk about it is this. There's really two steps to not to identifying, but to pursuing a target competitive position. It's what is that position? And then how are you going to compete there? Right. And that's the most important thing here. So, there's really four types of broad competitive strategies that I'm aware of that a business can implement to achieve competitive advantage relative to other category competitors. You can be the first, so you can create a category. We know that. You can be the best. You can be the category leader. You can be the cheapest, which isn't really an option for most companies in B2B SaaS, or you can have a focus strategy where you're doing one of those three things for a very specific segment of the market, right? Whether that be industry or region or something like that. So that's where I think a lot of people, what they'll do at that point is they're like, we've identified a target competitive position and we want to compete as the category leader, for example. All right, well, that's possible. Let's look at the wants, needs, and desired outcomes of this market. And then let's determine if what you're doing relative to what competitors are doing is best situated as a category leadership effort, right? If you're in a competitive space with 5 other companies that are crushing it and are obviously the biggest winners in that space and have all the ancillary stuff figured out, and your business is just speaking to those same things, but not competitively, it doesn't matter how much you want to be the category leader. Your highest likelihood of deriving net customer value is from a focused segmentation strategy. Yes. Let's understand it and let's move, but don't get held on to this idea that you want to start a category or that you want to be a category leader. The broad competitive strategy that you select needs to be based on where you're pursuing, what you're pursuing, how close you are to it, and what the competitors around you are doing, right? So that might be going down and segmenting. Right. But the point is if you establish yourself there as a leader, your next target competitive positions will be much more likely you'll have much higher likelihood of competing well there because you've established yourself here. Right. And the next place you want to go can leverage that uniqueness that you've developed there. And if you just keep that narrative going as you leapfrog, right, then you should be having meaningful differentiation everywhere you go. Easier said than done, but that's the general idea.
Yeah. So it's not about trying to be the best in the world, but it's really focusing in and being the best in your ideal clients, but the best in their world.
Yeah, how they define it and relative to what competitors are already doing. You know, like I love Panda Express. It's like one of my favorite guilty pleasures in the entire world. There's a low likelihood that there's going to be another competing food market like that, right? That just enters the market because they've already established themselves there in that segment of the fast food industry, right? And somebody that's trying to go into that space is going to have a very, very difficult time, no matter how much they want to be the category leaders in that segment, right? So it has a lot to do with what's out there, right? And what competitors are already doing with their time. And once you understand that, you just zig when they're zagging, you know, and if you can do that in a way that's meaningful to the customers, meaning that it's addressing important underserved outcomes in a way that's difficult for those competitors to replicate, you're developing that robust competitive position that Michael Porter talks about.
So what is something that second-time founders or those that have worked with agencies before know or probably have experienced that maybe first-time founders or maybe earlier stage companies haven't yet? You know, what are the lessons there?
This is one of my favorite questions. Those guys, typically, if they've been in B2B SaaS and they execute the way we typically do in B2B SaaS, right? They are at least open to the idea that our modus operandi around marketing information systems, correlation identification, and the subjective interpretation thereof is not the path to market and customer understanding like they thought it was when they first got started. So if you look at how most businesses make strategic decisions, B2B SaaS companies make strategic decisions. They go to market initially based on guidance from their partners, guidance from their founders, an idea of what it's going to be, right? Oftentimes that's not based on any sort of formal market research. It's just their knowledge and their experience and that of their partners that are bringing to market, which is fine to an extent, right? It's incomplete, but it's fine. But then once you're in market and you're looking to make incremental adjustments, there's 3 things that typically happen. You build a marketing information system, right? You put your pixels on your website, you connect things to your CRM, you set your funnel stages, you get it all organized so that people that are coming onto your radar, you can follow them down the pipe and you can segment them based on whatever attributes you have, right? So you build that system. The second thing you do is you look for correlations in that data. Correlations between upper funnel activity and lower funnel revenue outcomes. Things like, 80% of our closed won mentioned podcasts through self-reported attribution, or 50% of our pipeline is coming from Facebook, but we're only spending 20% of our budget there. You get those types of correlations. And then, and this is the important part, for these second-time founders or these people have been in it, and this is what typically resonates with them. When I say, okay, we've found these correlations. Now tell me about the process that you go through or that your agency account manager went through or your head of demand gen went through where they took these correlations, derived customer insights, and then made recommendations for how we should go to market differently. What does that process look like? And typically whenever we go through that process, it's like, oh, well, they found these charts and they put it up there and they suggested that this audience is more interested. So let's update our audience targeting, or this platform is more influential. So let's reallocate budget this way, right? And those decisions are being made with such a lack of genuine market understanding, and the gaps are being filled with our own biases and subjectivity that when done in mass results in these heavily redundant categories that I talked to you about. And then it's at this point where I pull up some examples of that and they're like, oh, I understand now. So what I'm saying is that let's use marketing information systems for what they're meant to be, ensuring funnel health, incremental optimization of an existing tactic, benchmarking and forecasting. But let's make sure it's not influencing our supposed understanding of what markets find relevant, useful, and compelling. Because if we come to any conclusions on those ideas, it's inevitable that they are going to be packed with bias and subjectivity. And I say, so let's talk about how we can get on the phone with your customers, understand the markets engaging with your category, prioritizing those needs, and then figuring out how we pursue those target competitive positions. So that's typically the starting point of the conversation. And then we talk about all the stuff we just talked about.
What if it is a new company and they don't have a customer base at all? They just have the idea. They think they know the market they're going after.
Yeah.
How do they get to that point?
So there's plenty of tools out there that connect researchers such as myself with specific professionals that find themselves in a particular circumstance. My favorite tool right now is Tegus, tegus.com. I have an account manager there where I'm just like, hey, I want to research businesses in this context that have done these things in the last 12 months and think X, Y, and Z about it. Okay, here's 20 of them that you can talk to. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. So for a brand new business, that's even better because you don't already have all this bias and junk clouding your judgment to begin with.
No baggage.
I can go and I can talk to the exact persona that you would consider an ideal customer, right? I can understand the context about what they did and I can bring that back to the client. I can say, look, here's your competitive landscape. Here's the thing you're positioning against. Here's what you're doing. Should we start a new category? Have you defined a new success metric? Are these category standards underserved? Can we really compete for category leadership? Is there an underserved segment? Maybe we should start there, right? That's almost the ideal state versus somebody that's already gone down the road and positioning themselves, and now you need to unravel that and move it back. So I hope more companies have the foresight, and it would be a good outcome for growth science if companies in that position can realize I need to start here with the market understanding before I go to market and collect data and incrementally arrive at some sort of target competitive position. It can't be done. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are funnel analysis practitioners. I've never been able to have a conversation that adequately answers the question, how do you bridge the gap between the correlations and the customer understanding? It's subjective. Right? It's based on our experience. It's based on our own agendas. I've been an account manager at agencies for a lot of my career, and I went through this process. And I know firsthand just how subjective and biased and unspecific these recommendations can be. And it was at one point where I was like, I don't feel confident like I should. I'm so good at funnel analysis. I'm so good at revenue attribution. I'm so good at all these things, but I don't feel and hear confident in these conclusions that I'm coming to. And that's ultimately what resulted in me setting out and trying to solve the problem.
So good. So good. Well, Tony, where can we learn more about you and about Growth Science online?
So Growth Science 1.0 is up. growthscience.io. It's got a video where I'm talking about competitive advantage and then some of my services. Growth Science 2.0 is in the works, and hopefully that's going to be live by the end of the year, right? Awesome. Lots of cool stuff, a very unique B2B podcast, a very unique community for research practitioners. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening there. I would say right now, find me on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is where I voice my opinion. It's where I share the podcast that I'm on. It's where I talk about the client work that I'm doing. It's the best way to get to know me and determine if I'm somebody that you even want to spend time acknowledging.
Well, that absolutely holds true here. So Really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you for being on SaaS Fuel.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to the next one.
Thanks again, Tony, for coming on the show and sharing your insights and resources. You can learn more about Tony and Growth Science at growthscience.io. As always, all links, highlights, resources, and full show notes are available at saasfuel.com, where you can subscribe or follow us on every platform out there. Plus, be sure to check out our YouTube channel for full episode shorts, outtakes, and some ridiculousness. Plus, this week, I'll give you a recap from SaaStr and what's going on here. Everyone who subscribes this week gets a perfect gift from California, and that is a Pet Rock influencer. California, of course, the home of the Pet Rock. Well, a Pet Rock influencer is a rock that has more Instagram followers than you. Perfect for boosting your social media campaigns. Just, don't question the idea. It's a rock star. Join us next time on our SaaS Fuel Expert Series for Erwin Howe, founder of Chromatix Website Design, an award-winning web design and conversion agency. Since 2009, he has analyzed 60,000 plus websites and gone on to amass over 80 industry awards. He'll be sharing how to make your website and copy engage and convert better. We all need that. And next Tuesday, Alexander DeRitter, co-founder, visionary, and CTO at Ink. It's the world's first AI-powered content optimization software. Alexander crafts magical tools for web marketing and loves to study the how and why humans and AI make decisions. So if you want a glimpse into the future of AI and where we're headed, Alexander's been doing this for years, and you will be blown away with his predictions for the future. So I'll see you next time, and maybe see you here at SaaStr. As always, enjoy the journey.
Thanks for listening to SaaS Fuel. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at saasfuel.com. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/saasfuel. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.